Biz-Dev Talks number 5. Welcome, welcome.
Welcome, welcome. Oh man, almost feels like it's been 5 days.
It's been like 2 weeks, so it hasn't been that much longer.
No, but I'm saying it's been 5 days since the last time I saw you on camera.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Um, we've been getting some good feedback, plus or minus, even though we're not getting not there's not a lot of people coming across these this diamond in the rough series, but the people that have come across it have actually been surprised because
So I've been surprised. What do you mean by that? I had one colleague that I used to work with a few years ago say that he liked the content, so there's at least one positive feedback.
yeah, and
And
then I have
honestly, I think it's all about just putting it out there over and over and over again, consistency, and showing
yeah
that we're here for the long run and not just posting stuff because we
just
want
to
to.
post it.
Yeah,
Well, we sort of want to too, but
yeah,
yeah,
of course, we want to put value out there, 100%. But I think it takes some time to build a following for the videos, especially if you're posting it mainly on the business page.
yeah. No, it does take time, and the people that have seen it, I believe, have probably received some sort of value if they did put up with the entirety of the show or the
I don't
talk.
know if anybody, I don't know if anybody watched the whole thing, to be honest.
Well, Roberto
I'd
for
be
sure
surprised.
has.
Yeah, I watched most of them fully myself again, just to try and find some tidbits that I could use.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, Roberto's been he's actually he's been enjoying it. You know, every time I see him sort of reviewing them, just to make all the time slots, he's just laughing, taking some notes, having some fun. So you know, it is somewhat enjoyable to some, and the people that have, for example, seen it, they have written in saying like, "Hey, sort of like what you're saying, right? Like I
Yeah,
thought the talks were good, and now I don't know if they watched the whole thing or anything like that. Though, for sure with the timestamps, and then as we also develop and get better at sort of being more concise and more straight to the point, not beating around the bush, even though I find the whole beating around the bush important because you need to at least acknowledge that there is a bush and and it's part of it, right? So yeah, but we'll see how it goes. In any case, I'm glad that we are doing it. So that's always a good thing.
yeah, man. I actually enjoy these talks. I wrote that in when I shared, I think, talk number 2 or 3. Um, like actually, and also watching them over again, like it's I enjoy them, so that's good,
Yeah,
I
that's what
guess.
matters, right? Is that we're doing things that we enjoy
Yeah, of course.
because there's enough stuff that is not enjoyable. So might as well do some things that are enjoyable. Even though
That are
everything I
fun.
do pretty much is fun and enjoyable, can't complain.
Fair enough.
So last time, I believe you were saying something along the lines that nothing's original anymore. Nothing is everything's a spin-off, you know? So it's like, and we didn't elaborate on it because I think it was towards the end where we're like, all right, we got to end this. So what's up with that? Is there nothing original, David? Is there nothing new,
Well, I think there is
improving new?
innovation, but I think even from innovation, there's a spin-off of something that has already existed at some point or time.
Yeah,
There are sometimes very unique and very new things that have never existed before,
yeah,
but I think those are rare. Most of the time, it's a spin-off. I see that a lot of in the gaming industry, like a lot of the
yeah,
games that are you know um, becoming popular now were popular like maybe 5-10 years ago, like the arcade genre is coming back a little bit, for example, because the new generation hasn't really experienced that in the past.
yeah,
So it's like becoming popular again, and it's just cycles in a form or other. And I mean, the arcade games also are now built for mobile. If you wanted to play arcade games back in the day, you would need a console or a computer. But now
yeah,
you can play it on your mobile phone. So I think it's like everything that exists or people come up with is a spin-off of something else. There's a saying that goes, "There's nothing new under the sun." That's kind of what I'm going with here. That I don't think there's anything truly new, or very rarely something truly new. It's always a spin-off of something. That's kind of what I was trying to say. Obviously, some people might disagree, and there is innovation, but even with innovation, it's usually that gets ideas taken from something, and either it's simplified or it's expanded on, whatever that might be.
Well, I can't really say much more than you sort of said it all right there, right?
Did I?
Yeah, you sort of covered everything in the sense that you're like, it's either something that you take the idea, either you make it more complex or you make it simpler, but you sort of have a foundation that you start at, like a starting point.
Yeah.
And that's sort of true. That goes back to what we're mentioning about benchmarks, right? Like knowing, like, well, benchmarks, I guess, is knowing where you want to go, like where you should be at. But I guess in another context, it could also be like sort of like a starting point. Like this is the basics, or this is the first principle of. Well, actually, no, first principle wouldn't really have to do much with a benchmark, but it's sort of like going like what you're saying is either going more complex or going simpler, but you start from somewhere. That somewhere might
Yeah.
vary,
Basis.
but you have a base at least, right?
Yeah.
Truly starting from nothing, yeah, it's pretty much impossible because you're always going to have some sort of bias, like what you're going to have some sort of experience that you're going to throw into that one thing. Like, oh, I
Yeah.
really want my house to be like this. And even though you think you're creating a house from scratch, you're sort of using something you saw somewhere else that you liked and
Yeah.
you're just building from that. So it is the unfortunate, it's not unfortunate. It is the way of life. Like there's nothing bad with that either, right? Like sort of spinning something off.
No, of course not. What I'm saying is every single thing that has existed from time immemorial, it
Yeah.
has been a spin-off from something else. So making like a new product that's a slight spin-off of something else, that's how you innovate, right? So
Yeah.
that's not a bad thing at all,
And
in my
innovation comes
opinion.
in like in steps, right? There's it's just like what you like sometimes people like what you're saying, right? You're talking about TikTok that over a year ago you're saying people should have been on it. But it's like now it's finally catching on, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
it's like things like that this
But you want to be
maybe
ahead of the trend, right? If you can.
yeah. No, and being ahead of the trend is sort of creating the trend, right? Because if you weren't on it, or if people weren't on it, or if someone didn't do that one thing, then you wouldn't know, like, you wouldn't have a reference point, right? So, sort of being there from the beginning or doing these small changes or whatever it might be is sort of um, how those trends actually come about or how those innovations actually come about. Like, someone sort of had to start it somewhere, and then it's like a very rough diamond, right? And then it just slowly gets shaped and polished, and then eventually people are like, oh wow, that's pretty cool, or oh yeah, sure, like whatever it might be. But yeah, anyways, so everything's a spin-off, nothing's original, not even your name. My name's original though. Charles, this is the first time it's ever been
Oh
used.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Right.
It's David, I've heard that one before, but Charles, brand new.
It's a very biblical name, which is interesting because, we're not a very religious family.
Well, David. I guess yeah, David is pretty biblical. Was it also like a royalty name or no? Was it?
I'm not sure.
Let's see.
In the stories, in the Bible stories,
Oh,
there was a king David and
yeah,
David versus Goliath. I don't know all the stories, like just some of them.
David versus Goliath. That's also a good book.
Oh, that's a book. Oh yeah, 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 yeah. Yep, yep. I've heard of it.
Malcolm Gladwell, I believe. But was it? Yeah, exactly. David versus Goliath. For some reason, I thought it had no. It has a sub name to it. But yeah, David and Goliath is the book. Very good book. In any case, though, David, economic crash. What do you think? This is we're February 28th, and the stock market's dropping.
Is it?
I guess you don't keep up with it.
I kind of do. I did see that the stock dropped, but I didn't know that it It was
Yeah.
mainly due to the coronavirus, if I'm not mistaken. I didn't know that it continued dropping.
Well, they're going.
But I
It's going
mean,
slowly.
yeah, it makes sense. I mean, it was kind of time. I was thinking that it might drop in the last year, to be honest. Like it's taken longer than I thought.
Yeah.
But I think if it's just a natural process. Goes up, goes down, goes up, goes down, right? So I
Yeah.
think it's going on the way down. Who knows if the whole coronavirus thing gets fixed or goes away or whatever, or a solution is found, should I rather say, if it fixes the stock market, or by then if the stock market keeps on going down. I don't know. This is not financial advice. These are just my thoughts. That's the legal statement you're supposed to say in these types of scenarios. Um, I'm not that familiar with the stock market, to be honest. I'm more familiar with the crypto market to a degree, and maybe specific companies that I like to follow, like Tesla, for example,
How is
that I
the
really do my research in and then decide if I want to invest or not.
how is um, the coin market going, the crypto market?
Crypto market. It's also on decline the last few days, but before that, it was in a crazy run up.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
because usually it's the crypto market goes pretty well during the winter season, right? Like December, January, isn't that sort of the raise, like where you start
Well,
seeing
I mean,
spikes throughout the year?
sure. I wouldn't say it like that. I mean, if you go back a year, if it's gone up 3 times, so it's gone up 300% since February of last year, roughly 300%.
Yeah.
So I mean, or yeah, that's
Well, for sure
2019.
doubled in the last year.
Yeah, it's roughly doubled in the last year, right?
Yeah.
On average. But if even December 11th it was at 7K, and then it went up to, what was it, 10K? Yeah, roughly 10K. This is Bitcoin specifically, right? And now it's down
Yeah.
to 8.6K. So I would just take a look at it and maybe even consider investing some into it, because apparently in March, I don't remember the date, there's going to be another Bitcoin halvening, and that means that it gets twice as hard to mine a Bitcoin. So the miners only get half as much Bitcoin for the same amount of effort, and that usually causes the price to skyrocket. So let's see if that's the case this time.
Yeah.
But in general, I still think that a lot of the cryptocurrencies that have survived this long and are actually providing value, that they will rise in the next year to 2 years. I see it as a more long-term strategy.
No, well, of course, long term is always gonna, like, things are gonna sort of balance out and raise over time. Like, as a society, as a global society, we've been progressing, right? So everything is slowly getting better, even though we might not notice it. But if you look back, like at stats, like 1 year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago,
30 years ago, yeah.
like things are rising.
Yeah. Oh,
So
of course. I mean, even if it's crashing, it's still higher than it was 5 years ago.
exactly.
Um, and I mean, I think I read someone quoted something on LinkedIn. I don't know who it comes from, but it was something along the lines of, the stock market is the only store that people run away when there's a sale, right? So when the stock price is low, people panic, but in theory, that's when you should be buying, right? And all investment advice says buy when it's low, sell when it's high. But people, for some reason, always get caught up into it emotionally,
What's the
maybe because
herd
they invest on.
mentality?
Yeah, I suppose so. So
So
it's
it's
all
like,
about like doing your research, picking the right stocks, and just waiting and holding it. It's long term and investing over and over and over again, and taking that compound effect over years and years and years and years. Apparently, that's the trick to proper investing.
yeah. And then also the other dilemma though is that a lot of the guys that have made it big, like they started, I guess it's never too late to start, but obviously earlier you start, the better off it is. And
The
that's sort of the
compounding
dilemma, is that
interest.
everyone sort of feels like I'm too late, or the other one is like I'm too early. Like this is not, it's always like sort of a combination of I'm too late, or because people have a hard time justifying, like, okay, if I put my money in now, in 10 years or 15 years or 20 years, it might be somewhat more, right? And it's like they just don't see it. Like if you're, and then also even for myself is like, okay, 5% on $1,000, is not much. 5% even on 100,000 is not that much, right? Depending on how much time it takes, but 5% on $50 million is a lot more interesting, right? So you always have this sort of thought in your head like, I'm not investing enough, right? You're like, it doesn't make any sense for this amount of money because if you do the percentages, it's only this much money. But then like that's almost the wrong way to see it because it might just like what you're saying is that it starts compounding and then it starts like eventually hits like an exponential point. But it's
Yeah,
just getting past that mental barrier. But then again, for sure, like I think there's better uses. Like if you're creative, I think there's better uses to your money than the stock market.
agree to disagree. If you have enough money, because I think you should have a diverse portfolio, whatever that might mean in both your business and in your personal finances.
Sure.
So for your personal finances, I wouldn't put it all into the stock market, right? But I would put a part of it just to have that grow. That's the whole point is not to have all your eggs in one basket. Because let's
Yeah.
say the coronavirus hits and all of a sudden the stock market is going down, and if you're really relying on that, or if you have all your money invested in that, you start panicking, right? So
Yeah.
the idea is to have it split, maybe some into gold, or other precious metals, some into the stock market, some into specific stocks, some into ETFs or whatever it is. Just to build a rounded out portfolio as opposed to just focusing on one thing. Because I think if you do invest in like the Nasdaq over a long period of time, like let's say 20 years, then at the end of the day, you're probably going to be coming out on top if you look at the long-term trends. And I
Yes.
think we talked about this a few episodes ago, where if you can get 10% a year on your money, it doubles every 7 years. So you wait, let's say you do have 100K, you get 10%, wait 7 years, it's 200K. Wait another 7 years, then it's a 400K. That's how that works basically. It's a little bit more complicated than that. And I'm
Sure.
also not a professional, or an expert on compounding, but that's the basic premise, that it's just wait long enough, and because it's percentage on what you have and what you have grows, that's how the curve just goes up.
But also I find that 10% nowadays, like depending, right? Like so let's say if you're investing in this country, like the currency is losing value, right? So it's like losing, I think just this year alone it went like 7%, right? Like an increase. So it's losing value to the dollar because we're based on the dollar. And so if you only have 10%, hypothetically, like you only have 3% growth, right? Because the money changed already, it lost 7%. And then let's say you made 10, so you only actually have 3%.
Yeah.
And with that being said, I find that if you're creative enough, like I think the stock market's a good like general um seamless way to make some money because it's like frictionless, right? Like you're just sort of making money on other people working, which is like companies that are trying to grow and develop. And as they grow and develop, then there's more value, and then whatever you invested has more value. So it's like sort of an easy way to make some money. But then again, I find that if you're creative enough, you could sort of find higher, obviously it's higher risk, but you can also get higher returns, right? So finding a business that you can make 20% on your money a year or 25% or some sort of startup where you can invest in it and it can get going, that is also interesting. But for that, you have to be on the lookout for those opportunities. And then you have the risk factor. Because let's say instead of putting 50,000 in the stock market, you give 50,000 to some guys that are starting a business. All right. Like stock market might be quote unquote to the society a little bit safer. But then again, those guys, they might be able to turn that 50,000 into 600,000 within 2 years.
Yeah, but as you said, there's the whole risk factor, right? And I
Exactly.
mean that's like the basic premise of what angels do. um, they invest in startups to try to get those 10, 20, 30, maybe 100, 1,000x returns.
Yeah.
Like if you would have invested in Facebook right at the beginning, as an angel, you'd be sitting very pretty right now, things like that. But for every startup that succeeds, I don't know the exact statistic,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
there are
There's
a ton of them that fail,
yeah, yeah,
right? So that comes back to having a portfolio, um, and you don't want to invest all your money in startups either, because if you do that and they all fail, then you're effed as well.
yeah,
So you need to diversify, so that if one thing doesn't work or one thing crashes to zero, uh, example of a startup or whatever, um, then the rest of your portfolio can kind of take the hit without too much damage.
yeah. No, and that's the thing, right? It's just like that. We feel that like the stock market is more secure than a startup. Is it or is it not? That's like a hard thing to say because well, we'll be able to see in the future, right? Like how because the stock market sort of is changing. If you're not a long-term player, let's say you're trying to do day trading and you're just a normal guy like anyone in the world pretty much, that's not one of these large corporations that has like AI technologies to do investment, then it's like or machine whatever way you want to say it, but it's like these guys who are doing day trade, they're like trading with so much information on such a rapid basis that for us like while we just clicked buy and we click sell, they already sold and they already traded on that 1,000 times, right? Just in like those 5 seconds, those 10 seconds, those 20 seconds. It's like they're so much faster than a normal person on the trading side for day trading. So if you're doing longer term, you have a chance, right? Because they're like sure they're trading every second, they're doing their day trading, but then you're looking more at like the larger picture, like the big value. But if you're trying to compete against machines on the day trading side, I think it's a lot tougher, right?
Oh
Like
yeah, for sure, and that's why I think this goes back to the talk that we had, was it last time, about a long-term strategy? No, 2 talks ago, I think, um, about a long-term strategy. And I think investing is different than trading, right? Because if you want to
sure,
trade, that's a whole different ballpark. Because as you were saying, I think it's called HFT, high frequency trading,
yeah,
and that basically just does thousands of bids a second, even depending on the market and so on and so forth. So there's no way you can really compete against that. You can still have your wins, but these guys are connected, like they set up their offices next to the main servers. That's why they're at Wall Street, because they have a direct connection. It's just milliseconds. Just a
yeah,
few milliseconds difference can be the difference between winning a trade or losing it or whatever. um, Again, also not an expert at this topic, even though I've done a little bit of research into it. So, I mean, honestly, if you're trying to invest, I would suggest to look at it as a long-term view and not just, how much can I make in the next month kind of
yeah.
thing.
No, that's the important part. Like it's finding that balance for yourself, like knowing your spot in the market and your current level of potential. And that's why I find like for myself, like the stock market, I know a lot of people that invest in the stock market and a lot of them do good, a lot of them keep up to it. But I just find that it's like, at least for myself at this current level, that it hasn't made sense yet, right? I would rather find someone that is doing something and give them funds than to do something in the stock market that I wouldn't know so much about, right? Like it's sort of like putting my eggs in a basket that I have no control over. Even though with a startup you have no control over it, but there you can know who's behind it, who's doing what. So that sort of gives you a little bit better sense of security, at least for myself.
Well, there are places where you can, just basically get like a breakdown of information if you don't want to do too much research. But generally, you should do research. And you're
Exactly.
saying you don't know what to, like, where you would invest, or you haven't done any research. But that's where it would begin. You would need to do research regardless of whatever investment method you wanna do, right? You should
Yeah.
not just invest blindly into anything ever. You should take a look into it. Do your research. um, it's called DYOR, do your own research,
Yeah.
for a reason, because you need to decide for yourself if you want to invest money into something, and really, take a look at it, um, objectively, and look at all the sides and so on and so forth before you decide to put money into something, um,
And
especially
the
if
other
it's a larger sum. or a large sum for you, a
Yeah.
big percentage of your capital.
And that's also another thing is like when you say do your own research, most people that would think about getting in a stock market, this is also where there's a bit of a dilemma and limit in your opportunities, is that everyone, whether they think they're original or not, are investing in like what they're hearing, right? So Tesla, Apple, Amazon, Google, Ford, like one of the big companies. And it's like, so you're not really finding those gems because you're very like scratching the surface. So the guys that are maybe doing those high returns are finding like that small company that's in Nantucket that created some innovative technology that has a potential of $6 billion, and right now they're worth $1 million, right? So that's where basically you might find those big opportunities. But most people that are getting into this, they get into it with like the herd mentality. They're like going where people already are. So I think you sort of like miss the bus in a way, or you're
Yeah, in a
or the
way,
potential
but
is
I
a little
mean,
bit
there are
limited.
people that always have to be the end of the train, and that's just part of it. And even if you are, then just go along with it.
Yeah,
But yeah, usually, generally, if you want to, get those insane returns or whatever, you have to do a lot of research and you have to take a few risks,
yeah,
arguably more than you would if you were trying to go for a stable 10 or 20%. And
yeah,
I mean, getting 10% nowadays stable, like guaranteed, not that there is a guarantee in stocks or investing,
yeah.
um, is really difficult. Um, I mean, if you look at the hedge funds, I don't think they even reach 10%. I think the
Not
average
a lot of them,
Nasdaq
no.
is actually like I think I read 12 to 20%. I don't remember exactly. I would need to check that. Um, but and that's the average over 20 years. So some years you probably lost, and other years you gained. So
And
that's
that's
the thing. You got to
why
look at it long term.
you
It's
got to
it's
look at it
not, you
long
can't look at
term.
it month on month, or even you know I would suggest looking at it every 6 months to a year, and just
Yeah.
if you trust in what you're investing and you do your research, then it shouldn't be a problem to just wait it out.
No, I would look at it long term, but also, like I said, that's why the creative side is important, because there you're going to have chances at higher returns. But there's going to be a risk factor with it. So it's just to decide on what makes sense for you. But in general, like for myself, like I said, is that I would rather take the higher risk, at least right now.
Well, I understand that, and I would too. But like I said, I would diversify, and I wouldn't just go for the high risk. I would combine it.
Yeah.
So I was completely wrong. Apparently, the 100-year average is 7.18 according to this website.
Only 5 times, 4 times my age, my lifetime. No, so
But
any
that's
case,
average annual return. It's not total. Average
yeah.
annual return is 7%. That would mean a doubling every 10 years, more or
But it's going to
less.
be interesting, anyways, to see what happens with the stock market, because also a lot of it is tied up with, at least in the States, like with the pension funds, right? So if that whole thing goes down, then that's going to be a whole other can of worms.
Oh yeah,
Or
I'm not too familiar with what's happening there, to be honest. But I mean, yeah, let's see what happens with that.
yeah.
I think
So
you shouldn't rely on pensions solely. I think they're a good thing if you can trust your government. But I wouldn't. I would consider that part of an investment strategy, right?
yeah,
I wouldn't just, if I had a pension, I wouldn't just leave it at my pension. I would, try to add stuff to it, whatever that might be.
yeah, but it's like it goes back to it, is that the options you're given as in the general is that it's very generic, and it's not like these creative solutions or these creative opportunities, right? Like they're just sort of giving you like the basic plan. So you don't really get all of it out of there. Like the people that are making a lot in the market are doing different things, right, than the general. So, or they're going deeper in that. So that's why it's that if you're relying on a company to or a country to give you your pension, then you got to see what's happening on a global scale, that like it's very unstable. Like look at Venezuela, look at Argentina, look at Chile, like look at all these countries that are sort of getting hit one way or another, or they're headed in a trajectory that's very like not looking promising, and it's just hard to live. And even in this country, right? Like in Dominican Republic, if you have the minimum salary and then you retire eventually, if the pension is not that high, and especially since the costs are rising every year, 5%, 10%, like once you retire and you're basing yourself off your pension, unless you have some sort of family to support you, you won't survive. You'll have to keep working till the end.
Yeah.
So that's why, like, overall, if you really want to try to make it happen, at least from what I think, is that you got to get creative. You got to be engaging. You got to take those risks, because the risk of not taking risk is also there.
You miss 100% of the shots you don't take.
Yeah, that is a thing, but it's also just the risk of not doing anything is also high, and that's what people don't calculate, that not doing anything today might cost you your future. So whatever that might be, you sort of got to take action today. Whether it's big or small, either one will work, and big also can be small in the sense that compounding, like what we're saying, things change over time, right? Saving that dollar, even though it's a small thing, for some people it's a lot, that it might add up for them in the end of the year, right? It might help them out, even if they just set it aside. So it's sort of taking responsibility. I think like that's like the whole part with like the economic crash, is that it's coming down to taking responsibility for your own life and your own finances. Because if you just leave it into the hands of others, they might not have the best interest for you.
Yeah, I mean, most of the time, people are most interested in themselves, and that's what I kind of don't understand about the whole Wall Street thing. So a lot of them are just out to make as much money as possible, not to actually, or
Care
investment
for the
funds and stuff like
companies
that.
or anything like
Yeah,
that.
care
Yeah.
for the company or whatever,
No.
or care for your personal finances,
But
right? Or they care. They're just trying to, even if it's risking everything, they just try to
but that's
make
also
money.
problems of the people, right? Because the people are making these companies or these funds expected to give these returns and do these large things, right? So even though people are like, "Oh, what are you guys doing?" They're like, "Well, we sort of did this for you." So that's the other thing, is that our demands and our expectations are sort of what's shaping the whole situation right now.
Fair enough.
But in any case, so this Monday you're heading out somewhere.
Yeah, I'm going on a workation on Monday.
Which country?
Spain. Well, I
Okay.
mean, we're going to the Canary Islands and to Fuerteventura.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, should be fun. Should be good. A little bit of sun. It's been a really, really shitty winter here in Hamburg this year. Like not much sun, cloudy, rainy, which is kind of typical, but I just really need some sun.
But is there snow or no snow?
It snowed the other day for like the second time this winter and didn't stay. Like it melted instantly almost.
But is it normal? Is it normally supposed to snow?
No, we're close to the
No.
water, so that means that in summer it
Yeah.
doesn't get too hot and in winter it doesn't get too cold. So that's the good thing about Hamburg, is that it doesn't get too cold here, which
Yeah.
which would really suck for me because I'm not a fan of the cold. But it's just been a super gray winter, which is also kind of normal, right?
Yeah.
But I think this is going to be good for a little bit of recharging the batteries, so to speak.
Yeah. No, it's always good to get some vitamin D. Are you supplementing on vitamin D out of curiosity or no?
No, not really. I mean, I drink juices and stuff like that, but I don't take any supplements.
Oh, okay. Might be something to
But
consider.
I've thought about that. Yeah. That's something I was thinking
No,
about,
they
just like
say
a
like,
vitamin package.
well, the vitamin D, right? Like, that's the thing that they say, is like we don't live in an ideal world anymore. So like we don't have ideal solutions. So you sort of have to make these compromises of like supplementing, of doing things that normally you don't really like, as humans we shouldn't have to do, but like we sort of have to do it now because we are in different environments.
These
We
are the
are
new,
indoors more. We
yeah,
are
the new
living in
society we live in. Yeah.
yeah, we are in places. Most people live in places where the sun's not always out. Like here, we have the sun out every day, almost. And it's easy,
Even if
right?
even if it is sunny, on winter time, you're out when if you're outside, you're wearing long pants, maybe
Yeah,
even 2 layers. You're wearing boots. You're wearing, a jacket.
yeah,
Sometimes you most of the time you're wearing a hat. Sometimes you have your hoodie up. What part of your body gets sun? Your hands,
yeah,
maybe.
exactly.
You have gloves on. Like what? Your face, barely.
Yeah.
You know.
No, and that's why you need that direct sunlight. It's really good
Yeah,
for you, like on many levels.
for
But
sure.
that's it. I was just wondering if you're doing some supplementation. But in any
No, but
case,
I've
are
thought
you?
about it.
Yeah, well, one thing to think, one thing to do.
True.
So you're gonna be gone for how long? A week?
9 days, 2nd to the 11th.
9 days. So back in the day, though, you used to like sort of work abroad, right? Well, you always worked in a way abroad, like moving
Yeah,
around.
sort of. I mean, that was the initial idea of doing online marketing, is to be able to travel and work, which was
Yeah,
always like what I also was the idea behind of me choosing graphic design at Niagara College, because I thought, as a freelancing graphic designer,
yeah.
I'd be able to work anywhere and do it. But then I found online marketing, and that fits me better because it's more with numbers and so on and so forth.
And how was it? Like, how has been your journey down that path? Because a lot of people are thinking of take that journey, right? Like you started what 10 years ago or
Yeah.
longer, right? So how is it from your experience? Like, well, you sort of have a head start on a lot of people, and it's like, how has that been going down that route initially? Like, well, sort of like freelancing and then traveling around. Like, what are the pros and cons of that? Like, what has been the good and what has been the bad about it?
The good is that you get to experience a lot. You get to visit new places, open your mind a little bit, learn new things about different cultures, so on and so forth. The bad is that you don't get to enjoy it as much as you would if you were just traveling, because obviously you'd have more time to, experience more things. But
Sure.
even if you're just working abroad and you move to a place for a month or whatever, you can still experience the vast majority of things and get a really good idea of a place, especially if you meet the locals and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Um, I personally really enjoyed it. I don't know if it's for me anymore because I have a family now, but I would be down to doing shorter trips and still being able to work abroad, kind of like this one. This is still a workation, right? For me, I would
Yeah.
still be trying to work at least 2 to 3 hours at the very minimum on my computer per day. Then on my phone whenever I have time, I'd be checking campaigns on Google, Facebook, so on and so forth, to make sure that everything's running smoothly. Um, and if there's any scheduled calls, make sure that those happen
Are
on my
completed. Yeah.
computer. Yeah.
No, that's like like here we see it a lot, like probably not more than other countries, but there's a lot of like these digital nomads, right, that come down and they work from their computer, right? And they do whatever they might be doing. But it's like what I've always been sort of thinking as a company is like the whole part of should you like how should you structure your company first? Should you be working with people around the world, people abroad, freelancers, not freelancers? Have I have like this sort of philosophy more of that it's good to like be contracting people around the world to or collaborating with people around the world because it gives you access to new talent, talent that you might not have locally or specialized talent that not might be found even in the country. But then again, it's the other side of it is that then you're sort of on the whim of you're hoping that it's sort of like the stock market, right? You hope that that thing you invested in, that person you're collaborating with, is gonna put their end of the bargain without your control, right? So like when you put money in the stock market, there's no control if Apple's gonna do what they're supposed to do. You're just sort of hoping that they have a track record and that whatever's said is gonna be completed.
I would argue it's the same thing with employees, right?
Yeah,
Like I've 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 heard from business owners, one of them that's really close, and I know the real details about. I can't go into specifics, but they hired somebody
yeah,
that had like a stellar track record, and it turned out that they just almost destroyed the company within just a year of given autonomy. So you always have to be careful. If it's a freelancer or if it's an employee, you always have to, make sure that they're doing the work, make sure that they're doing it right. You shouldn't micromanage, but you should keep an eye on things. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Um, and I think outsourcing to freelancers is usually quicker and easier than trying to hire an employee. Because usually with an employee, you need to give them benefits, you need to give them contracts and so on and so forth, which you should still do with freelancers. But here in Germany, for example, with a freelancer, you could have a contract that just ends the relationship within 2 weeks. But with an employee, the usual is 3 months. So if you're
yeah,
working somewhere and they want to get rid of you, they can fire you, but then they have to give you at least those 3 months of salary, and then whatever else is on top.
yeah.
Um, or they have to, if you want to leave, you usually have to wait the 3 months, finish those 3 months, and then leave, unless you can come to a mutual agreement. And with freelancers, there's less of an attachment, but on the other hand, um, it doesn't build as much of a connection, or they might not try as hard for your company unless you can somehow bind them to the company and make them a hybrid of a freelancer and an employee kind of thing.
No, and that's why like there's this big opportunity with companies sort of like ours where if you have that mentality of like that you're there to help the guys and understanding, because now I also find like when I look at these LinkedIn ads or I look at these job offerings that companies are searching out for, it's like first you realize that they have a lot of turnover with their employees, right? Like people are not finding that satisfaction or that whatever it is that someone might be spewing out, like, oh, if you don't feel good for one day you should quit because that's not healthy life. All this sort of like horseradish that doesn't make much sense in my opinion, where it's like it's like what I think it was John F. Kennedy, right? It's not what your country can do for you, but it's what you can do for your country. And with that sort of mindset in place, is that people are always expecting the companies to go above and beyond, but then they don't go above and beyond for their companies, right? And this is sort of the shit of why you see companies sort of behaving how they behave with their people, because they're like, you guys are just in it for yourselves, so then we're going to be in it for ourselves. And then it starts tearing people apart. And that's why it's important, whether you're an employee or sort of like a company that's doing services for other companies, is that you have that mindset of like, okay, they might be paying you a hefty fee, they might be paying you X, Y, and Z, but it's like they could have chosen someone else to do that work potentially. So that's why it's important that you as an individual or you as a company sort of does the best possible work that you can do and that you can do for that company to help them and bring them actual value, instead of being like, oh cool, we just got a fee, and then sort of screw it and do mediocre work. And
Are you
that's
talking
why
about
like what
are you talking from a freelancer perspective or from an
I'm talking
employee
from both,
perspective?
right? Like either whether you're an employee or a company, or whether you're an employee, a freelancer, or a company that gets contracted to do certain projects, you got to sort of have respect for whomever you're interacting with, because a lot of people are just like trying to, what you're seeing in Wall Street, right? They're just going after making money for themselves, and they don't care what the repercussions are for whoever it might be. Whether it's a company, whether it's a country, whether it's an employee, they don't really care anymore. So it's like sort of having that mentality of like, okay, there should be a lot of respect and gratitude for them even considering you to do that work, whether you're an employee, a freelance, or a subcontracted company or a contracted company to do that work. And yeah, like, because we sort of strayed off from the original topic, which was like, how is it working abroad? How is it to like hire freelancers? And there's a lot of good things with it because it sort of like gets rid of a lot of those extra costs and those constraints that you might have. But then again, you lose another part of it, which is like the connection, etc. But it's like if you're able to be a freelancer, be a contractor, be a company that could sort of work side by side, whether that relationship lasts 2 weeks because it's contracted for 2 weeks, or it's contracted for 10 years, you should be there working for that company to bring them as much value as possible, or that individual if you're hired by an individual. And that's what I sort of feel that's getting lost, is that now these companies are just trying to attract talent by sick days, flexibility, We have a game room, we have a coffee, like all these things. And it's like, but the people don't want to bring that value back to that company, right? Like they're just trying to see what benefits do I get for me and then nothing else. And I think that's sort of like I don't think it's sustainable in the long run, because all these companies are just trying to give benefits and benefits and benefits and benefits, but then eventually when times get tough, they might not be able to live up to those benefits that they were sort of promising, and then they sort of like go bankrupt because of that. And then the employees don't stick around because they're like, oh well, why did you guys get rid of this and that? They're like, well, it's costing us a lot of money and like we don't have the money for it. It's like, oh well, I really wanted that, and then they leave, and then it's like a vicious cycle. And that's sort of what happened in Venezuela, right? Is that the country was giving everyone everything for free. Then when things get tough, they're like, hey, we can't give these things for free. They start taking it back. People start losing their shit. And then eventually it just spirals downward. So it's like sort of, I believe it's Malaysia that, they have this sort of mentality of when things are good for everyone. And when things are bad, things are sort of bad for everyone, has to sort of make sacrifices. Right. So it's like this sort of
But it's hard to build a culture like that, regardless of if it's employees,
why.
contractors, or whatever. Because at the end of the day, if I'm an employee and I'm living paycheck to paycheck, or maybe I'm saving a small percentage and putting it to the side, and I have, on a rent I have to pay. I have, um, in my case, let's say I have a daughter. I have to make sure that she gets food and food gets placed on her table. And if a company is like, yo, it's tough, I can only pay 50% of your invoice, you're like, well, then I can only do 50% of the work because I need that rest of the 50% to be able to pay rent and to survive
Sure.
and to live. Um, so I mean, it's difficult to just say that like that, because oof, it's a really tough topic, I would say, and I would kind of argue that it doesn't really work that way. um, Maybe sacrifice in the terms of not maybe reducing paychecks, but maybe like, we won't be able to offer you free coffee for the next 3 months or something like that. Maybe, amenities and so on and so forth. Coffee was a bad example,
Yeah.
but any, benefits that you might usually have, I think that would be okay. And in that regard, I would even see employees being like, yeah, let's all huddle up and work hard and turn things around. But usually you do that by including them, right? Including them in the topic, including them like, yeah, hey, last month was not good. The month before that wasn't good. Let's like right now we have 1 week left of cash. And I remember reading a story about this. And what he did is he brought the whole company and he's like, yo, we have 1 week of cash. And then all together they're like, okay, you know what? Let's all get together and come up with ideas on how we can raise money in the next week.
Yeah.
And then they managed to raise a ton of money because everybody collaborated and everybody felt like they were part of, saving the company.
No, and that what you're saying right there is I think is more what I was leaning towards. Is like the em employer and the employees have to work synergistically, right? So you don't want to be in a situation where you have to cut down. I think it's better to be in a situation where you get people to double down. Like, hey, look, we're sort of hitting a tough time. Obviously, what we've been doing is not working, so we need to do some readjustments. It's best to avoid the financial side of like you can't have someone like without a home, without food on their plate, especially if they have a family that they're supporting, like saying like, hey, you have to you're gonna have to like make drastic changes on that end, and then we're gonna need you to work harder, right? It's easier to be like, hey, look, let's make sure that everything that's important to you is covered. So let's make sure you have enough food for your rent, enough money for your rent, enough money for your food, like money for gas, etc. But also like we're gonna need some help in the sense that we might need you to put in some more hours just for the time being, just so we get everything back up to normal. Like sort of like figuring out a way, because you don't want to make people's like, I'm not saying living standards change, but you don't want to put people like hungry people are not going to work well,
Yeah.
right? In general, like maybe okay, maybe that motivates an individual. Like some individuals are like, I don't have money for food. Now I'm like ready to really like figure this out because this can't be happening. But there's other people that freeze in that situation or like
Yeah,
they're
of
like
course.
no way. And especially when it comes down to if you have kids or whatever it might be, then that really changes your perspective, right? Because adults, they can starve, right? But kids, it's hard to see kids like suffering because you're like, man, like,
You can have your kids taken away if you don't give them food.
well, forget about that part even. I'm just saying it's tougher to see because you're like, they don't know any better, like they don't have the same opportunity to like, they don't have the same threshold of like suffering, right? You're like, man, they
Yeah,
don't
of
deserve
course.
it type thing.
Yeah,
Like as an adult, you're like, ah, okay, you could skip a meal, you can do this, you could do that because you have a different experience and a different threshold. But for kids, you're like, man, like imagine a baby, right? Like he's defenseless. He can't do anything for himself.
yeah. I think we're straying off topic a little bit.
Yeah.
Um,
But anyways, oh,
But
that's a
I
whole
think
nother
the
thing.
final
But
question is like, what's the ideal option for a company in terms of
yeah,
should they go for employees? Should they go for freelancers and stuff? And I think it depends on what you're trying to do and what you're trying to build.
sure.
If you're willing to hire remote, and you can find employees for that, all good. But I think you should still, for certain things, contract companies because it might be easier and quicker to get up and running, as opposed to trying to do everything yourself with a company that has already experienced what you are experiencing if you're a growing company, or because you can basically pay for someone else's knowledge, um, and have them
And you could
start with
hire
you
on
instantly.
demand, like
Yeah,
depending on what
exactly.
your
You can
needs
hire
are.
on demand. Exactly. With an employee, it's either part time or full time or whatever. But generally, with contracting companies, they're like, "Oh, we need 10 extra hours this week," and then the contracting company can just allocate more people on it or allocate more time to your
The
company or
projects.
whatever it might be. Freelancers generally are able to do that too, unless they're fully booked out. And so, I
And
mean,
you're also
I think
limited. Yeah, sorry.
I, I think it depends on your needs.
Yeah,
I'm a fan of freelancers. I'm a fan of contracting companies. Usually, contracting companies is a bit more expensive than freelancers, obviously. Uh, but then you usually have someone that's more dependable because a company's reputation is usually more
at
important
stake.
for
Yeah.
more at stake as opposed to a freelancer.
No, and that's the thing is like, and also some countries, unfortunately, even though they have a good talent pool, they have a bad reputation,
Yeah,
right? So when you're a company, you sort of, it's sort of like gets rid of that part, right? Unless you're a company in one of those countries. But if you're like, ah, we're contracting this company in the United States and they happen to be using countries that are not that favorable in certain aspects, right? You're using Chinese, Asians, like Indians, you're using Ukrainians, Russians that might not have the best reputation as a freelance. But if it's under a company, then they're like, ah, okay, like these guys are good at what they do, right? Like there's some places that, or even
because
Dominican Republic or the Caribbean, right? They sometimes have a bad reputation because they're like, oh, these are pirates. But then when you put it under a company, then it sort of changes
because
the
the responsibility changes. As a freelancer, you, the company, have to validate that person's work. But if you hire a contracting company, usually what happens is if they don't deliver the work,
yeah,
then it's much easier to follow up or like to fight against that company legally as opposed to an individual freelancer.
yeah,
So I mean, it depends. If you're trying to really build a community and stuff like that, then it makes sense to go for employees. But I would argue that even if you are trying to do that, it makes sense to bring in freelancers for certain tasks. If you're trying to look, or even a contract company, if you're trying to grow quickly and just because it's hard to hire good employees, and it's much
yeah,
easier to try a freelancer out and see if they work or not. An employee, you have to usually commit to hiring that person for months and years at a time, as opposed to a freelancer where it's more flexible, or a contract company
exactly.
which is more flexible. So I would argue doing both, like trying to build out your community or
Your team,
your team, but also relying on freelancers and contracting companies if workloads get too much. And I saw that recently at a company where their certain department was just under so much load that they were weeks and weeks behind on their work, and it would have been easily solved if they would have just gone to a contracting company, or a bunch of freelancers and been like, hey, we need this done. um,
like, can you do
Help
it?
us out here.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. No, and
exactly.
that's the thing. It's sort of like being open-minded to that. Like finding people in-house, and especially I think it's important, like what we do, right, is that you have someone in-house that knows the you might know a lot of specifics, but also like the macro of how things should be done,
Yeah.
and then you can freelance under that, because it's hard to freelance something and have no
That you
idea
have
how
no.
that thing should be
Yeah.
done,
Yeah.
because you don't know if the results are
Yeah.
good or bad. Like you have no benchmark, no reference, so you
Yeah.
just take what you get. But when you
And
have, yeah,
no, no, go for it.
no, when you just have someone that knows how things should be done, and then you're contracting people that are doing those things, then you could sort of like, hey, you need to be doing more, or okay, he's doing a good job, or you could. It's easier to tailor and understand what's actually happening. But if you have no clue, then you sort of just got to go with whatever you get.
Yeah. Exactly.
So it's a
It's
bit
a
of a
good. That's a
gamble.
good. Yeah.
But that's why it's like, I think it is important to be open minded, because then the nice thing about the internet, this is obvious, anyone who's using the internet understands this, I believe, is that it's beautiful in the sense that it connects everyone, right? So now you're not limited to your town, let's say Hamburg, or let's say Cabrera or Santo Domingo or Punta Cana. Now, depending on what you're doing, you can't have a, a virtual server at a restaurant, because that's not the drinks and the food will not make it to the table. But for a lot of tasks and skills, now you could have you could have someone building your website from Ukraine, or you could have someone building your website from the United States, and you could be based all the way in Turks and Caicos without a problem. So this is
Yeah.
the beauty behind it.
The internet connects the world and makes international business much easier for sure.
Yeah.
Um, but to your point, I believe there is or are a few restaurants. I think Japan was one of the first where you can order digitally, and then because of the way the restaurant is set up, obviously the food comes to you. It's like a little, conveyor
The
belt that
conveyor
brings the
belt.
food to you.
Yeah,
Yeah,
sure, but that I don't think is the same. Like,
yeah.
who's the waiter?
The the
The screen?
the interface or whatever. Yeah.
Uh,
I don't know if it was a screen, but I think it was a screen. Yeah,
yeah, because I know
that's your
those
waiter.
conveyor
So
belt restaurant. I forget what the name is of them. I think they
no, no, but it's
actually.
different. They
Ah,
built this restaurant specifically, like the conveyor belt is just to deliver the food. There are other ones that
gotcha,
are like
gotcha.
there are other ones that have a conveyor belt and they just put food on it and you pick
Yeah,
what you want. But this one is you input what you want and
and
they
it'll
cook
come to
what you
you.
want and then it'll come to your exact
Table.
seating position. Yeah,
Yeah. No, okay. Yeah. Well, I guess
and
like
I think
there's. Sorry.
go for it. Go for it.
No, I guess there is people coming out with certain things. I don't know how good that experience is. I guess if you don't like to interact with people, it's a good experience. I always like waiters, because like sometimes you have really funny waiters and good people, doing that, and then it's just more entertaining. But maybe there's a way, like I guess if you want a peace, calm, and you just want quality food and quality drinks, whatever it might be, then I guess you'll settle for a virtual experience.
I can also imagine it being quicker, right? If you know what you want, you order. You don't have to wait for the waiter to come over and order it. And I think that's also a gamble sometimes because sometimes you can get great service and other times you might be sitting at your table waiting for 20 minutes before you've ordered your drinks and you're like, yo, we were ready to order our food 15 minutes ago.
Yeah, but that comes down to the waiter, right? Like if you have a good
Yeah,
waiter, then
exactly.
within 2 minutes of sitting down, or even within 1 minute, you're already greeted and you have a menu,
Yeah.
right? Like if it
Yeah,
takes
of
you
course, of
15
course. But
minutes to
that's my
get
point with
greeted
the
and a menu,
virtual.
then
Yeah, but that's my point with the virtual thing. Is like as soon as you know what you want, you just press a button and it's ordered.
yeah.
So maybe a hybrid of having a virtual interface for you to be able to order things, but have real life waiters to entertain and to bring you everything. So maybe yeah, like a hybrid system,
It's all about the hybrids now, diversifying. No, but also it's good to be focused. It's
combining.
good to have certain fortes. But yeah, being open-minded to the diversification is somewhat important, because also now, especially for a business standpoint or financial standpoint, things are not as stable, or I think things are getting less stable in a way as we move forward, or like the distribution of capital is also going to be changing, because a lot of people are not going, that's like the dilemma, right? People are not going deep enough, they're not having enough understanding, so that's also making them vulnerable to the whole picture, because now they know a little bit about a lot, but they don't know enough about something to maybe see the trend of how things are going, because they're always on the surface of everything, right? So you don't really
Yeah.
see what's actually happening. You're just like, oh, okay, that business went down, that business goes up, and like you think you have a grasp on like the global situation, but then again, you're just like very broad, and that might make you vulnerable because you don't understand why that business went down or why that business is rising. And it's more important, I think, to know, understand why. Like, it's good to see the trends, but it's also understanding why that trend is happening, you know, because then that might put you in a better position to be like, oh, okay, yeah, Goldman Sachs went down or Lehman Brothers went down, but why did they go down? Ah, okay, the government had a part to do with it. Okay, the investors had a part to do with, and then you start seeing a little bit deeper. But if you just see, Lehman Brothers went down, and you leave it at that, then it's like,
I think it comes back to what we were talking about earlier in research, right?
yep,
Decisions, especially important decisions and decisions that might, like big decisions, should require a certain amount of research before you decide on doing that thing, or at least a certain amount of testing and trying. So before you try one thing um, fully, or you commit to something,
yeah,
and maybe try it on a smaller scale to learn more about it, and to and research it at the same time to get your own picture,
yeah.
um, and then go from there.
No, and that is what we even mentioned, right? Is that I think now moving forward, the future is that you have to be responsible for your own life, right? Like, yes, if the government can help you, if your company can help you, if even your friends and family can help you, great. But in the end, you can't be relying solely on that. You have to be creating value. You have to be doing great for yourself, because then that's how you're going to be able to survive, right? If you're just there relying on that or this or whatever it might be, then you're vulnerable to that. And then that thing is vulnerable to everything else that might be affecting it. So it's like there are some things that are riskier and some things that are safer, but you need to understand that and you need to know that. And how do you get to know those things? By doing research, which is
Yeah.
back to what you said, is that you need to do research. And research is fun in the end, because then you start figuring stuff out and you're like, oh, wow, like I didn't know that this did that and that's connected to this. And, you start figuring out all these things. Obviously, I'm just saying general things, but like once you start going down the rabbit hole of whatever it might be, like it makes things more fulfilling, more interesting. And then you start realizing how things are really interconnected. And then once you start realizing how things are interconnected, you realize like, oh, wait a minute, this is actually somewhat fragile. Like this is not as strong as I thought it was, or as they make it seem it is. And then that sort of also helps you gauge risk, gauge opportunities, and everything of that nature. So that's why it's important to do research to get informed. And yeah, sure, like what you said, it's nice once in a while to get entertained, watch a movie, play a game, whatever it might be, but you don't want your life to be based around this. You almost want your life to be dedicated to getting better, to knowing more, so
Well,
that,
you say you want, and it depends. That's what you want. That's what I want. But other people might not want that. You know,
and then
you,
they're going to
you
suffer the consequences though of that decision. So no
well, it
problem
depends.
if you want to play
What is
games all day.
what is a consequence though? If someone's happy doing something, even if that means, playing video games all day and then just going to their job or whatever,
Yeah.
then I applaud that as well.
But what
Because
does
they
happy
decided.
mean in the sense of they might be happy today, but then they don't see once, let's say the people in Venezuela, right? Like maybe 3 years ago they were super happy, or even 2 years ago. And then
Well,
once this whole
maybe
thing happened and they never prepared, then they're like, shit, I don't have any food anymore.
that's an extreme example.
But that's a possibility because it's happening today, right? It's happening
Yeah,
right now. So
yeah.
it's not that
But
it's
what I mean
impossible.
by being happy is, let's say, going to a job that you enjoy and so on and so forth. If that job is even, not as important as growing every day and improving every day, then as long as that person is happy, then I think that's the main goal that you should go for in life, being happy, and not like, I don't know, slaving your ass off, hustling all the time for just because it's part of society, or because you think it's cool or whatever. That's
Yeah,
just
but
my opinion.
I think but that's that's the thing, is that it's a double-edged sword, because if you're just going for like the entertainment, the luxuries of life, then you're setting yourself up
I think we're talking about different things.
in a way.
I'm not saying you should, you know, you should, like, if entertainment and stuff makes you happy, that you should only do that, not focus about your future or be concerned about your future. Yeah, sure. All I'm saying is that if you're not happy
Yeah,
hustling all the time, and you're not happy pushing yourself to your boundaries all the time, then you know it might not be for you. Is what I'm saying.
yeah. But then it's just to know that we seal our own faiths, right? So everything has a pro and a con. If we work super hard and this and that, we might be risking burnout. We might be risking, if we do it to an extreme, that we're not. That's also sometimes when you don't understand yourself. And that's why it goes back to understanding yourself, because then you'll be able to position yourself, however that might be, in a sustainable way. But first, you need to know who you are, how you operate, what can you do, and then also realizing that, okay, it's like when I started reading a couple years ago, right? Like I wasn't a big reader in high school or even in middle school, and then I got into reading, but I realized like I read I was reading half a page and I was bored. You know, I was like, man, this is bullshit. And then I started reading more, and I forced myself to get past that, and now it's actually become something enjoyable, because now I'm like, hey, there's a lot of information. This has the secrets in a way, right? Like all the answers are out there, but you have to find them. You have to research. You have to test things out, right? You have to push yourself. It's like in the gym. No one's there in the gym telling me what I'm supposed to do. Now it's up to me to do it, right? And it's the same thing. Like if you're also relying on, let's say, a trainer, if you're relying on the government, if you're relying on a company, and you don't really understand what that company is doing, who taught that trainer, how that trainer learned, or what your government or the company, I forgot what I said before, if it was company or government, but whatever it is, you have to try to understand it, right? People don't want to get involved in politics, let's say, but then it's also important to know what are the people that are sort of holding the faith of that country you're operating in, doing business in, living in. What are they up to? What direction are they trying to bring things in? And now, is that a direction that's going to be sustainable? Is that a direction for you? And I know it sort of seems like it's off topic, but then again, it just goes back to this research part, is being interested in figuring things out, right? Sort of being a scientist, even though a lot of people didn't like science sometimes in school, but it's just going back to that, using the scientific method to break things down, to then being able to understand something, making your own theories, making your own conclusions. And that's the part that's sort of lacking, because if you don't try to understand things, well, you could live, you'll make it, right? A lot of people live and make it. But then again, now when things might not be going in your favor and you don't know how to analyze those things and sort of come up to conclusions of why you are where you are, or why things are the way they are, then it's sort of your fault, right?
You are responsible for your own future. I think that's what you've been trying to get to the whole time.
Yep,
Um, and that's back to common sense. Common sense that isn't so common. People seem to forget that and blame others and blame the government, blame the company.
yep,
But yeah, you are responsible for your own future. You are responsible for your own actions. You're responsible for what your future looks like based on what you do today and what you do tomorrow and the
yep.
next day and the next day.
And that's
Um,
why it's like, and then a lot of people take that the wrong way, saying like, oh, since I'm responsible, I need to be the owner of the company. I need to be this. I need to be my own country. But that doesn't mean that. That just also means, like, let's say you're happy being part of a team. Now you just need to know what you need to do to make sure that wherever you're at succeeds. How do I help my country succeed? How do I help my company succeed? How do I help my clients and my customers succeed? Because then you're actually going to be able to sort of like make things happen, right? You don't need to only be an entrepreneur. There's also intrapreneurs, which are people like inside a company, inside an establishment. It's like us. When we're doing work in one country or another, we're trying to help that country move forward because it's in everyone's interest. Now, what you would hope is that the people that are in charge of that company or in charge of that country are not super corrupt and sort of bringing the company in another direction, or the country, and leading you to an abyss that is not going to benefit anyone, right? That's going to sort of kill everyone, or sort of put everyone down. So but that goes back to understanding and sort of seeing what the leadership is doing wherever that leadership might be placed, right? If that's a local community, if that's even on a board of directors for your school where your kids are at, sort of understanding and being engaged.
Yeah, I agree. Doing your research and figuring out what's happening is definitely something you should be doing.
And it is exhausting because you have to put
Of
energy
course.
into it,
Yeah.
right? And then you get frustrated because sometimes the answers are not there. It's not a Google search. You can't type in, what is that guy thinking? Like, where is this company going? There's some details that are not on Google, and there's some details that are not at your fingertips. So you have to sort of talk and synthesize and think about them and use your mental juice to do that. And then some people are exhausted because they had long days at work, or they have problems with their family. And that's why it goes all back together, that everything matters. And that's why when you start lining things up and start being engaged with every aspect of your own life, then things get a lot better for you. Whether you're super loaded or super broke, things will get better for you because now you're more in control of your own life. So that's
Makes
that
sense.
little rant part there. Though,
Little rant part. Little rant part. That was quite a while.
yeah, though it goes back to that we're only we're at the first ending the first quarter of the year, and what are some important things sort of to look out for the rest of the year, even though we're pretty early in it? We're only March, but I always feel like I'm already living plus or minus September, October. Like I'm already planned out till there, which is not that long, like compared to some companies that I heard about. That one company that
100 years.
exactly, like, so we're not as far as that family, but that's here in the Dominican, by the way. There's probably some other guys out there that are like, probably like Elon. He's like, I have my 1,000-year plan already. You're like, all right, bro. Um,
I don't know if you can plan that far ahead. There's a
exactly.
thousand
That's
years. It's gonna
that's
be look so different from
he's
today.
making calculations. He's like, all right, if I buy every company in the world in 1,000 years, we'll own everything. Yes, you will. No, but yeah, what are some important things to look out for? Like, what are you looking out for? Like these next 3 months, 6 months, nine
What
months.
do you mean? But what am I looking for? I mean, the coronavirus is definitely going to dictate a lot of what happens in the next few months in terms of stocks, and I think also just the general economies.
Yeah. Is Germany affected, quote unquote, right now? Like, are they taking
I think there's 18 cases, something like that. Last I checked. Last I checked, whatever was in my news feed.
yeah. But they're not
I
like
mean, it's
closing. They're not like Italy, where they're like closing down
no,
gyms,
no, no,
closing
no, 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 no,
schools,
no, no, no,
and
no,
all
no.
this stuff.
But from what I've heard, Germany's pretty prepared in case some like there is an outbreak. But you can only be so prepared for something like that because it, nobody's sure how it gets transmitted, how long before symptoms show up. It gets transmitted if it actually is 2 weeks, if it isn't 2 weeks, if it's longer, if it's shorter, whatever.
Yeah.
There's a lot of ifs and buts or whatever. But besides that, the Bitcoin halving, I'm looking forward to that to see if there is actually going to be a spike in terms of general cryptocurrencies. Other massive events. I mean, it's interesting that MWC or Mobile World Congress was
Cancelled.
canceled, and I don't know if GDC, which is the Games Developer Conference, is also going to be canceled, but companies are stepping back and out of it. So let's see how that happens. So, like I said, a lot depends on how it continues with the coronavirus, and a lot of events might be canceled because of that for various reasons.
No,
So
it's
I mean, honestly, it's hard to say for this year because there's a lot of uncertainty in
yeah.
terms of which events I'm looking forward to.
No, there's a lot of things, like even here nationally as well as internationally, right? Like here, the country might be changing political parties, and then you have the United States with the whole economic situation that a lot of countries around the world are tied up with this economy. So if this economy suffers, then a lot of other people start suffering. So that's one other part. And then now you have this black swan that people are. There's always black swans, but this one that they're throwing out, the coronavirus. So the coronavirus, though, I find more is just a media gimmick, just to keep people suppressed and keep people sort of like their heads cluttered with stuff that whether it's relevant or irrelevant. I think if you like, there's no reference point, right? Because unless I lived in, where was it, Huan or Wawan and
Wuhan, I think.
Yuan in China, right? That where it originated, maybe I would see something different. But from what it sounds like now, it's sort of getting tapered down to like it's like a just an extreme cold or flu,
That's
whatever.
it's
And it's
apparently
like
like pneumonia-like symptoms. I don't know the exact details, but
exactly,
apparently it's not fun at all. Um, but some are saying that the statistics that China is reporting aren't correct or are
yeah, sure,
somewhat off. I was reading a post where some dude compared it to the trend of Italy and the trend of I think another country that was also having an
yeah,
outbreak, and compared to what the Chinese officials were saying, and what they saw in terms of data is that the in the other countries it was basically going like a straight line, and according to China, like it did taper off, but did it really, or are they just reporting that it did to
yeah.
to make sure that the economy doesn't crash? So that's the question. And are
Yeah.
they reporting all infections? Are all people that did get infected and maybe have gotten healthy? Did they even know that they had it? There's a lot of questions that nobody
But
knows
the bottom line is that I'm not in China,
answers
I'm
to.
not even in Italy, and I'm not anywhere where they're getting quarantined or anything like this, right? So how do I actually, the only thing I know is what the internet might tell me, but what I do feel is that they're just trying to keep people's heads filled up with random stuff. If you live in some island, some part, like there's, you know what I'm saying? Like there's, if like on an economic standpoint, all right, if they stop imports to your country or they stop certain things, you'll find a solution because not everything comes out of China, right?
But that's the thing, and that I was reading something about this as well. I'm glad you brought it up
Yeah.
because a lot of companies are not prepared, and they do source mainly from China. A lot of their products come exclusively from China,
Yeah, well, there you go. Now
and
there's
they
going to
have no
be
plan B, and they're basically are relying on China, and because China is shutting down
so
and the
there's
coronavirus
some
is affecting them.
country that's for sure, or some company, let's say, better like that, that like let's say is selling whatever's common in China. Let's say, I don't know if it's like, let's say
You don't
some fruits or
understand. The vast majority of products are made in China
yeah,
nowadays.
but I'm just saying, like, let's say if it's from a produce standpoint or even if it's from a cardboard standpoint, right? Whatever it might be, um, there's going to be some company out there. They might not be able to handle the global demand, but they could probably handle some more demand. So then they start calling up all these countries and these places saying, hey, look, instead of buying from China, you can buy from Mexico now, right? And then the people are like, all right, sounds good. Yeah, it's going to be 2 weeks lead time to get the boat to you guys and this and that. And then now these guys are exploring a whole new outlet of business just because of this. China closed, great. I get all your clients.
And that makes sense, but they have to capitalize on that, and it takes time. And a lot of companies move slowly, especially massive ones that have like large ass orders, month after month after month. It's hard to fulfill those. And I was
Yeah,
reading like massive companies rely on China, like Johnson was one of them, if I'm not mistaken, and like a bunch of others. And I think even ibuprofen, or one company was relying on China for all of their ibuprofen, um, and stuff like that. You know what I mean?
yeah.
So
But that's the thing with chaos comes a lot of things from good to bad, and good for some, bad for others. And in the end, it is what it is. But the ones that can adapt, the ones, even if you're a big company, you can have one guy in the company that's the David and Goliath book, where it's like one person can make a change, right? One company can make a change. So, or one country even. So this is the thing, is that you got to be an entrepreneur or an entrepreneur, or you just got to be some guy who's really like on it to then seize these opportunities. Like this can be a massive shift for a company, for a country,
oh,
to
for
change
sure.
their situation from good to bad, right?
And a
And
good example is companies like Zoom, and I've been seeing a bunch of those charts on LinkedIn that people have been sharing. A lot of remote based applications are seeing a massive spike in installs and use, because people are no longer able to go to the offices to work because they shut them down in China, or in North Italy, or wherever there might be an outbreak. Um, and they're relying on the remote connectivity to be able to
yeah,
still continue working.
Yeah.
So, or for example, Plague Inc. That had a huge spike in downloads, and China even banned the iOS version in China. I think in
Why?
the last 24 to 48 hours. I don't know, man. Maybe because it had so much to do with the coronavirus and it was sparking fear. I don't know. China likes to contain information. That's why
Yeah.
the whole firewall of China. Um, Maybe it was just causing them concern, whatever. So there would be an opportunity to come out with a similar game that might, compete a little bit with Plague Inc., but could get a ton of installs. So basically, you can definitely capitalize on things like this, and there
Yeah.
are certainly certain industries that benefit from things like this for sure. Like there's so many people that are buying face masks now. The companies that produce those are probably having a field day. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
So
It's
so there's
vacation time once this virus is over. Keep
basically
producing, sell that, sell that, sell that, and
exactly.
then we take a vacation once this whole hype's over, and then hopefully the next trend needs masks as well.
Yeah, basically. So of course there's benefits but in the majority of cases things like this don't cause a benefit. They cause what would be the opposite of that.
I think those are for the companies that are sort of they pass that stage of being adapt like the stale companies. I think those are the ones that are going to
No, not
suffer.
even if it's a big company, like I said, it takes a
I said
lot of
stale.
time.
I said stale.
Mm,
I didn't say
it's
big
still
or small.
even okay, fair enough. Fair
Because you
enough.
could be a big company and lean. There's a lot of companies that are lean, right?
Yeah, sure,
Because
sure,
you
sure,
just
sure,
say
sure.
this,
But you
use
got to
7 people,
readapt
start working on this new
processes.
project, figure out the
You,
solution,
you got
and
to
then you can shift things. But if you have the mindset of, oh, we're a big company and we're slow, then of course you're going to be a big company, you're going to be slow because that's your mindset. But now,
you're not understanding how complex ordering massive amounts of product from a specific place is to shift to another one, including all the logistic steps. Like,
well,
I
we
think you're
do,
underestimating that. No, I understand that, but that's why I think you're
yeah.
underestimating this. Like, even if you are a big company and you're lean, it will still take a lot of time to shift things over like that.
Yes and no. Like I have to agree to disagree there because I've seen it from all standpoints, right? Like we do importation. We haven't done exportation yet out of this country in larger quantities, but let's just say importation. And you figure things out, right? Like that's why you need to be on it. Okay, I want to import this new product. I want to import this new I want to register this new chemical into the pharmacies. Like all these things that you want to do, you could find a solution for them. It doesn't do you think I know the answers of everything? No, but you figure them out. And the same thing that I'm doing, if I was in my own company or if I was in a company of someone else's or if I was independent, whatever it might be, you could find these solutions out because you
Of
have the
course,
internet and you have the phones. So you just start calling, right? You start sending emails. And then within a matter of days, you should be able to start figuring out solutions if you really wanted to. But now, if you're chilling and then you're like this and you're like, no, let me see what's on WhatsApp, take a photo. And then your company's all there suffering, like, hey, where are we going to find out this new carton supplier or this new supplier for this one chemical we need to make, or this one produce we need to create this one product? And you're just there chilling, chatting, updating your stories and whatnot, then of course now you're just clowning. And that goes back to it is that if you really want to, you can do it, whether you're big or whether you're small. Now, if people are
yes,
limiting
but
themselves,
even if you want to, it will still take some goddamn time, dude. It does not
well,
just you can't just call a company and be like,
I
"Hey,
might,
I want to
yeah,
order 500,000 boxes of this and have it ready for next week." You know,
yeah.
that's not how that
Obviously,
works.
there's a production time behind certain things, right?
Contract time, and
Paint
like if it's
takes time
massive orders,
to
it's
dry. I understand.
the whole legal team. It's like for massive companies, it's a big difference to just move over their entire production and logistics and stuff like that. Even if there is a plan, and even if that plan is produced in a day,
Yeah.
you still have to make contact the companies, make sure they have the production ready or start the production, get the contracts ready, get the legal team over the contracts, so on and so forth.
Yeah, no, that's but you could always make things happen depending, right? Like people can always okay, from moving the production part away. right? The 24 days it takes to make those boxes and print those stickers on it, all right? Just moving that away. Finding the connection of someone who can do that is a process that if you really wanted to, you could start figuring out those solutions quite
Oh,
fast,
sure, of
right?
course.
Now, of course, these companies or your company would know that they can't make 800,000 boxes tonight because they have to make the
The labels,
not the labels,
box
forget,
design,
no, it's like the press, like
the
the
stamp, I think.
not the stamp only, but it's like the plate. I think a lot of companies use the term the plate. That's what I'm familiar with, like the design plate, right? So if you want to
Yeah,
have this
stamping
certain
plate.
shape, yeah, then they need to create those things. So and then depending on the industry, it can be more complex or not, depending what you're creating. But the molds and all that. But the point is that the initial, like, a lot of the research can be done quite fast, but a lot of people take their time because let's say they're like, oh, we found this one company, and they email one company and they're waiting on one quote and they're trying to reach one person instead of like, let me throw out 700 fishing lines and seeing what I can get, right? They throw out one line and then they wait. And then they reel it in and then they throw it out again. Instead of like taking a bunch of lines and just throwing out a lot of seeds to
Yeah,
see what comes back. And then not limiting themselves either. Like, we're only going to deal with North America, and then they don't consider South America, they don't consider Europe, they don't consider Asia or anything like that, even though they could consider these options, right? So this is like what I'm saying is that some people, like, they sort of take their time and they waste a lot of time in a time of crisis, right? They It's not good to act too fast, but it's also not good to act too slow. So it's like sort of having this double-sided approach, knowing when you can go fast and when you need to slow down. All right, we found 10 leads. Now we need to slow down and see which one is actually a good fit for what we need. You know,
yeah.
this
That
company can produce
that
it.
makes sense. That
This
makes a lot of
company
sense.
can produce it, but it's going to take them 300 days to get to our order. Okay, so that doesn't sound like the best option. This company thinks they can produce it, no guarantees, and all the money is up front. All right, I'm not sure about that one. These guys said that we pay them 50% up front. They could have the production ready in 6 weeks, and they can start delivering it, and within 10 weeks, we're going to have it at our door.
I get where you're going,
Then,
and yes, in that case, I do agree. You can move fast in terms of what you can do to make the process happen faster. And there are other companies that just sit around and don't do anything and just wait to see what happens, instead of
exactly.
reacting. And
And
yeah,
even
that
we
makes
use the
total
term
sense.
companies, but companies are built up of individuals. So in the end, it's just a reflection of the individuals sometimes, right? Because they're like, oh, we gotta wait for. Sorry, I closed the screen for a second. I thought I had closed it. Like, people create the companies, right? So the culture in it. So now if you have this culture of like, oh, like the legal team always takes like 7 weeks to get back to us. Do you think the legal team really needs to take 7 weeks to get back to you? It's just that they're
No,
also chilling. So
yeah,
now you got to go like, hey, Billy, you need to read this contract and I need to know what to do by the end of the day. Ah, but it's 50 pages by the end of the day,
but that's the
right?
thing. I mean, if you're a different department, you really don't have that power to say like, "Hey, Billy, and get this done." And then, yeah. And I get that, and I
That's
agree
why you
with
need to
you. I
connect,
agree with
right?
you, and it does feel like sometimes some companies, a lot of different departments are just chilling and taking their
Yeah,
sweet
they're just
time.
chilling,
That's
and then
true.
they also separate themselves. They're like, uh, I don't need to be good with the
Yeah,
accounting department. Oh, I don't need to be good with the production, the team. Oh, I don't need to be good with the sales team, and or the marketing department. And then it's like, yo, bullshit. Like, you need to be all working together to make things happen, right? And but that's how we always used to do things around here. Well, those things
I
don't
don't
work
care.
anymore, right? So you need to
Yeah,
sort of adapt. And if you don't
yeah.
adapt, then you're going to be done. And that goes back to it, is that if you're not staying on top of things, whether it's in your industry, whether it's in your own life, you're being vulnerable, right? And that vulnerability might not, you might never live the consequences, maybe, right? Like, you just end up whatever, and then you die at 50 by a car accident, right? And then you don't get to live out the consequences of your eventual obesity for not eating healthy, or for your like negligence in certain things, right? There's always these like sort of these events that you can't really forecast or calculate. But let's say you do live a complete life, like from 0 to 100, let's say, and you neglect your health. Okay, you're going to start paying for it eventually, probably in your lifetime, right? You might not even make it to the 100 actually, so it's not maybe a good example. But as a company, if you don't start adapting and you don't stay on top of it, then you're going to get beat by someone else. Someone
Of
else is going
course.
to come in, right?
Yeah.
And then that's the end of it. And that's why I even wrote a note here, sort of like the closing note that I wanted to like sort of get to also, is that you almost have to go where no one is or wants to be, right? You got to do those things that people are not doing. If you're doing what everyone else is doing, then you're literally going to be on that same playing field, and you're going to have, whether you think it's different or not, like, oh, I work in a bank and he works in the government and she works at McDonald's and he works at Subways and this other one works at a bank, like whatever it is, right? Like, oh, he's a car salesman. Like, if you're just sort of living the day-to-day routine, the normal life, the 99% life, right? Then you're really putting yourself in a position vulnerable to what a lot of people are going to be suffering. And that's why you sort of have to take initiative and sort of do things a little bit differently, and then you're going to reap that compound effect overall in the long term. Like, how many people are reading nowadays? Like, reading, like, not only self-help, like this wah wah wah, let's hold hands kumbaya thing, but I'm saying like strategic things, philosophical things, um, concepts, biographies to learn from the past, right? Sort of trying to figure out what is actually happening. How many people are doing that nowadays? Not really. Most people, I forgot what the statistic is, don't read one single book after they leave university. They think once they have that degree, once they have that
Yeah, it's
paper,
over.
then it's over. I don't. Why do I need to watch another video on how to do this one thing or that? So they start limiting themselves, and that's sort of like the beginning of the end for those people.
But I mean, this comes back to what we were saying last time: is constant growth,
Yeah.
and it never ends. Growth never ends. It's a constant thing. Especially if you're trying to achieve certain things, you need to continuously grow, and your education never ends. You always learn. You can always get new input. You can always get new ideas, and that continues till the day you die, in my opinion.
Yeah. But it goes back to it, right? You got to do what other people are not doing. If everyone is doing what you're doing, then you almost got to reconsider it, because you're like, wait a minute, where is this going? And that goes back to understanding, researching, trying to see, not only see the trends from the top, but also understand why those trends are happening, why those cycles, what are the cycles,
Yeah,
you know, what cycles have already come, what cycles are potentially coming, and taking all this different information and then making a conclusion out of it for yourself, and then being like, oh, do I need to worry about the coronavirus or not? um, do I need
and I mean,
to, yeah,
go for it. Never mind.
no, it's like whatever it might be, right? Like, understanding what's happening around, understanding what's happening within yourself, to your, like, to you, what are your blind spots, what are your vulnerabilities, and then sort of like either accepting them or adjusting to not have them anymore. But it comes back to like doing what others don't want to be doing, being where other people are not, and sort of taking that approach that's unconventional. Because if you take unconventional approaches, you might get unconventional results. And
Yeah,
if you do things that
zig when
are
others are zagging. That's also a common sense that is not so common.
zagging,
Zig when others are zagging. You know, zig and
okay,
zag.
yeah, I haven't heard that one before.
I'm supposed to say that we're also starting a podcast, and
Oh,
this podcast will be on Shopify, and it's also going to
Shopify?
be on, sorry,
Yo, you're too much.
Spotify.
You're too much in the e-commerce world, man.
I used to be
Yeah.
Spotify. This podcast will be available on Spotify and other websites, wherever podcasts are to be found.
Yeah, it is. It's gonna be under the Biz-Dev name.
Podcast Addict is also going to be included.
No, it's good that we're sort of putting this content out for people to have it on the audio form because we don't really show any visuals yet, so it doesn't really matter. They're just staring at our faces. This is more of something that you just play in the background. But or you could also watch it, take notes if there is any nuggets that you might find, which I do think there's always some little things that are being dropped. The overall pictures, though, I don't think it's anything specifically that we actually do say. Like there may be some specifics that help certain people out, but it also goes more to like the bigger concepts, right? Like these are the things that are going to sort of like be your pillars and your building blocks to whatever you're doing and whatever situation you might be in, because these are like the guiding principles and values that individuals and companies should maybe consider to either integrate or not integrate, but it's like at least consider, because in the end, right, there's no fixed timeless strategy that's gonna like be able to withstand everything that's happening,
Well,
especially now.
basics do, or at least certain basics do. But yeah, I
But that goes
agree.
back to the values and the principles. But I'm saying like what how I advertised this pen in the 1975 might be a little bit different than how I advertised this pen in 2020, in the sense of maybe I'm gonna have to move away from advertising in newspapers and I'm gonna have to start advertising online,
Yeah.
right? Like things are gonna change. They might be like small changes and obvious things, but what I'm just saying is that there's not one there's not one it's like there's not one fixed solution forever. Like it's fairly there
No,
might
I get what you're
be
saying. I get what you're saying.
I think one fixed thing is that you always have to be learning, right? So okay, like always be ready for change. Like but that's sort of like I think not obvious, but I think after you realize everything, I think that's something that sort of comes out of that. Is that you have to be prepared for the unpreparable. And that means like what the hell are you saying? But it's like exactly that. Sort of be on edge all the
Be
time
on edge.
and figure things out.
I
And
disagree with that, but okay.
yeah, you might disagree with it, but I think it's the way, because you have to sort of have this sense of urgency and this sense of paranoia within you that no matter where you are at in life, big or small, like things can change
Yeah.
real quick. So
I
just be
I,
ready
I
for that and be ready for personal changes and environmental changes, in the sense of like not only environmental and like hot and cold global warming. I'm saying environmental changes that I used to live in this small town in Iraq. Now my whole town got blown up. All right. Do you think
that's a
they were
bit
planning for
extreme
that?
as well. I don't like it when you use examples like that, to be honest, because that's extreme and is serious.
Yeah, it is
But
serious and it is extreme,
I
but
get what you're
it could
saying, and
happen.
I think we should end it there and just be like, be prepared for change, be prepared for the
Yeah.
unpreparable. Um, yeah,
Be prepared for the unpre no, be prepared. What would be that? What would try to predict the unpredictable? Maybe that's
try
the
to
way.
predict the unpredictable. Okay.
And the reason why I go to extreme cases is because it's hard for us to believe, but these are actual things that have happened, right? So it's not like it's
What's
a,
happening today?
a
Probably like,
it's not such a far-fetched thing, right? Because it has happened, right? There is some things like these black swans and these things that that would never happen to me because I live right next to the ocean. I haven't seen a tsunami yet, but there's a chance,
yeah, of course
right?
there's a
So
chance.
so now if I'm just like living in La La Land, then do I want a tsunami to happen? No. But now if it does happen, I better know how to swim. I better know how to get to high ground, right?
Yeah, I was gonna say I think swimming doesn't bring you much in that scenario, but you got to
Well,
go to high ground, yeah, for sure, and you
yeah,
got to
well,
know how to get there quickly. And I get what you're saying. Like I said, you have to be you actually should at least think about the worst case scenario so that if
yeah,
it does happen, don't expect it, but if it does happen, then you should at least be
I would
somewhat
actually say
prepared.
expect it. Be ready for that. What if a tsunami comes and takes my whole restaurant when I'm on the beach? What if this happens? What am I going to do next? Like try to have these hypotheticals, because hypotheticals are nice because they sort of force you to get creative, and then they might make you realize certain things that you weren't thinking of before. And that's also the thing, is that we're trying to be too, what is it, PG, in a way, like with all our thoughts and decisions and what we say, and or PC as well, politically correct. And it's like that's sort of limiting things because people don't say what they think anymore. People are not expressing themselves. People are just like, let me just like live between this. But life happens on the edge, on this edge and on this edge. That's where you really start living, right? And those are the moments you remember. You don't remember those mundane days of like, I did it. Like, like life happens on these extremes.
Yep.
So that's why, and a lot of people don't like the extremes. Perfect. More opportunity for the ones that do, because that's where you're going to find things. And then the extreme becomes the norm eventually, right? So, and then you have to go back to the edge. So that's why it's always about pushing yourself to the edge, pushing yourself forward, and going where no one wants to go. That's why I was saying that. It's like whether we agree or disagree about it, like of uh, my examples of Venezuela or Iraq or hiring freelancers around the world, like there's nothing good or bad about it. It just is what it is, right? So
And
it's
I
just
get
like
that,
it's
but
not
my
getting.
point, my only point was you shouldn't shy away from things like that. My entire point was not to use them in jokes, and I don't think it was a joke the way you were saying
I
it. But
was not a
sometimes you
joke at
do
all.
make jokes. No, I know, but sometimes you make jokes that seem insensitive to me, and I'm not trying to be politically correct, but
Yeah.
making fun of like things like serious things like that is something that to me is something that shouldn't be done.
No, and in that sense that you say it's true, but also the other side is it's also like this is the dilemma of the world right now, right? Is that we're saying like okay, we shouldn't be saying these things, but then again, like people, it's like this is what happens, and the reality is a lot of people don't even care,
Yeah,
right?
that's
So
true.
people pretend they care because like, oh well, you shouldn't say that, you should do. It's like, well, do you actually give a shit? So that's the other thing. A lot of people just say they give a shit, but they don't give a shit. And I think that's like sort of the big issue is that if you don't care about something, just say you don't care about it. Be like, f those guys or f that or and live it.
All right, bro. And on those words, like I think we've really talked about this topic for like the last
Yeah.
20 minutes now. Like, let's end it. I need to take a piss.
All right. So I do
So
also. I also need to go drink something because my water ran out in the first 5 minutes of the video.
of
So
the talk, I
of
have
the
this
talk.
big bottle of water. It's almost empty.
Yeah. No, but in any case, man, it was great talking, and I think it is good to sometimes hash out these more sticky subjects because someone has to sort of mention these things, right? And this is the thing is that we're not mentioning certain things, and that's why things sort of escalate, almost like in the stock market. People are not trying to; they're just waiting till it explodes to talk about it instead of trying to like talk about it before to like not let things explode. That could be in a
Yeah.
relationship, that could be in a business, that could be on a contract, that could be on all types of things. So that's why it's good to express ourselves. Doesn't mean we have to agree with everyone, doesn't mean we have to disagree with everyone. It's just express ourselves, have respect, and push forward. So with that being
Yeah.
said, David Shwarz,
Peace, bro.
have a good
Have a good rest
day,
of the day.
and
We'll keep on chatting about things.
yeah, we'll be back on I don't know which day, but we have to figure out a day because you're gonna be
I might
traveling
be
on
able to
Monday.
Tuesday. Yeah, Monday I'll definitely be traveling.
Yep,
Tuesday I might be able to get on a call. It depends on
the
the
surf
course of the day,
conditions.
but well, no, I'll probably be surfing in the morning. But it should be possible. Tuesday shouldn't be a problem.
All right then. So Tuesday it is. Have a good day, have a good weekend, and
Likewise,
hopefully the
man.
coronavirus does not get you all the way in Hamburg, Germany.
It shouldn't, but we'll see.
All right, man.
Peace, bro.
Peace.